Uh, the Western honeybee, Apis mellifera, is by no means a typical social insect, but it is the paradigmatic social insect in the sense that up until about a century ago, virtually all major new concepts um, relating to social insects broadly were based on empirical findings from this one species. And in that process, in the early period, in the early period, this relied largely, in my opinion, on three Europeans. And I'm going to be dealing with the second of these, Francois Huber. He was a lifelong resident of Geneva. He lost his eyesight at a very early age. Fortunately, he was from a well-to-do family, so he didn't have to work for a living. He could do as he pleased. And it pleased him throughout his life to study the honeybee. He had a passion for science. Now, you may wonder, how does a blind man go about observing honeybees? In this, he had help from others, primarily from his personal servant, Francois Huber, who was effectively was his technician. And Huber had such confidence in Burnon's reports that in his writings, when he says, "we observed something," he does so completely, entirely without any irony. Now, let's see. Okay. There's a picture of him. Now he relied on two main virtues. He had superior techniques, and here's a picture of one of his observation hives, so that he could look into the workings of the colony. In addition, he had superior experimental sense. And he proceeded in a stepwise fashion, testing things as he went along. The result of all this is his life's work is nicely put together in a single book titled New Observations on Bees, with the second edition of which appeared in 1814. For us, it's very convenient because we can look at his entire life's work just in this one book. Among his discoveries was that beeswax is not something that is collected from flowers. It is, in fact, a glandular product of the bees themselves. His most celebrated findings have to do with the process of swarming, how it works, what it achieves, and this set the modern understanding of the process of swarming. And so, in his book, he lays forth everything very systematically. Now, this is my summary of part of his research. He had a whole long series of experiments in which he says what he did, how he did it, and what the upshot of it was in a modern way of doing things. Now, one could, in a 45-minute talk, go through all of them and summarize as I have done here. I'm not going to try to do that. I'm not going to try to talk that fast. So I'm just going to hit a few high points as we go along. Well, the first thing, he asked a very simple question. Do bees breathe? As far as he knew, all animals had to breathe. But here were these thousands of active creatures inside a fairly small enclosure with just a narrow opening, why didn't they suffocate? Did they, in fact, breathe? And he wasn't about to just take that as a given. So through his experiments, he demonstrated that, in fact, they do breathe. They exchange, their air exchanges by means of the spiracles, and that, in fact, the colony as a whole breathes. Well, how? Or more specifically, how is it that the air inside the hive remains much as the air outside the hive? Was it a property of the hive itself? And he demonstrated that no, it was not. By the simple experiment of putting a lighted candle inside an empty hive. And before long, the candle faded and then went out. So he inferred that it was something that the bees themselves did, that they maintained the freshness of the air inside. And his attention was drawn to bees fanning at the entrance. Now, fanning is simply flying without going anywhere, holding on. And he thought, well, maybe these create a current through the entranceway. And he showed by the way of little tiny anemometers that, in fact, this does take place, that they do create a current. Oh, now what is that? I have no idea. Okay, I tell you what, I'm going to skip through this. Oh, I was born in the 1940s. I don't know about these things. Well, so he looked at the process of fanning. And he noticed that by manipulating the carbon dioxide content inside the hive and gradually decreasing it below ambient, he demonstrated that there may be already at the beginning some bees fanning at the entrance. And by increasing the CO2 content, more bees and in a stepwise fashion. As he increased the CO2 content, more and more bees started fanning. And then as he allowed the CO2 content to come back to ambient, some bees stopped fanning until it was just back to the original ones, if any. Now, I think you know where this is going. The first ones to stop fanning were, everybody, were the last ones to start. And it gradually tailed off until it was nobody left except the ones that had been fanning in the beginning. Well, I have called Huber a physiologist out of time. And let's look at why that is. First of all, the concept of homeostasis, or the constancy of the inner environment, what Bernard called in his famous medical physiology textbook, the fixité du milieu interne, it was already a concept in engineering. So, for instance, with the steam engine. But it had not yet come into biology. That waited for, but you notice that, as I've just described, Huber already understood that there was a constancy of the inner environment maintained by the bees with respect to carbon dioxide, with respect to the air composition. But what Bernard did not understand was that the key element in this was negative feedback. That waited for Walter Bradford Cannon much later. But you notice that as I've just described it, Huber was describing negative feedback in the regulation of the air quality. Finally, throughout his researches, Huber treated the colony as an entity. These are colony level processes. So that, but he was effectively treating it, although he didn't say so, he was effectively treating it like an organism, or what today we call a superorganism. That was brought to the social insect colony in 1911 by William Morton Wheeler. And so the upshot of all this is that Huber, way back in 1814, was the father of what is now known as sociophysiology, physiology at the level of the social insect colony. And this is something, for instance, that is at the heart of some of the writings of Tom Seeley, among others. Well, I have just laid out some rather bold claims. And you may wonder, well, am I historically putting into Huber's writings something that wasn't really there? Well, I don't think so. I mean, that's a great sin in history, often committed. I don't think so. But don't have to take my word for it. You can find out for yourselves. So Huber's book, the second edition and definitive edition of 1814, is freely available on the wire. You can find it easily with a Google search. If you prefer English, there are 2 English translations also available on the wire. Now, as far as I know, neither of these has any substantial errors in it. But the translations are a bit too free for my purposes. So what I've done is I've taken the expedient of doing my own translation of the 2 chapters that apply to this question. So you can find that on the wire. And as always, I didn't do all this all by myself.